professionals, anybody, come on out. We just want to enjoy time together, have some free food, have some drinks, just connect and network. It's really important, especially in these days when so many people work from home. We got to have spaces like this where people can get together and just talk and hang out. So I'm super excited tonight to welcome our two panelists. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to talk about employment law. We're going to talk about family law. So whether you are a contractor, freelancer, employer that is looking to sharpen up their skills when it comes to employment law, or interested in family law, custody, divorce, whatever it may be. Prenuptials, thank you. This is a conversation that I think you will benefit from listening to. And we'll have a chance at the end to ask some questions as well. So please keep that question in your pocket and we'll ask at the end. I want to introduce our two panelists. If you could give them each a round of applause when they come up. First, Max Emmer. He is the owner of Emmer Law. Emmer Law PLC. And also Rachel Salina, Associate Attorney at Barry Mormon. All right. Thank you. All right. So, like I said, we're going to have a little conversation, but first I want to give each of them a chance to just briefly introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the type of work that they do. So let's start out with you, Rachel. Tell me a little bit about you and what you do.
Sure, my name is Rachel Salina. I apologize for my voice. I had laryngitis earlier, but happy to be here. And I would say most of my practice is dedicated to civil litigation, representing largely the employer side of employment disputes. But I also do a lot of contractual disputes in litigation or pre-litigation, and a lot of corporate transactional work, and I also act as general counsel for small companies that aren't big enough to have their own legal department. So that's the majority of my practice. And
thanks, Rachel. Thanks for coming on, everyone. My name is Max Emmer. I have a boutique firm in Bloomfield Hills, Emmer Law, where I exclusively focus on family law, collaborative divorce. I'm a mediator. It's happy hour, so I'm allowed to swear. I pride myself on being the non-asshole family lawyer. I believe 99% of people do not benefit from protracted litigation that rips families apart and drains their bank accounts, whether it's prenups, divorce, custody, anything related to family law. And additionally, I really pride myself on being an advisor and a counselor and really a connector. I always say, I love networking, I hate the word. I think relationships are so important, things like this are so important. So anybody I know, anybody where I can be of help to someone, whether it's directly, professionally, or within my network, I'm happy to do so. I always like meeting new people and cultivating my knowledge as well as my network to best serve my family, friends, colleagues, clients, and professionals with all sorts of different people like you. So thanks so much for coming out, everyone.
Awesome. The first question I want to put to both of you comes from my own experience. I run a company now, Flow Video, but I got my start as a freelancer, a contractor, doing marketing work, digital marketing, web design, graphic design for clients. And early on in my career, I was signing a lot of contracts for freelance work, right? And the client would provide a contract. Many of you here I know work freelance or contract work, so you're used to this. You get a contract, there's a lot in there. You probably don't necessarily read it all, let's be honest. I didn't at the time, in my 20s. And there's a lot of information in there, and a lot of it might not be stacked necessarily in my favor. And as I grew and evolved as a professional, I actually got kind of to the other side of the table where I was writing the contracts and providing them to contractors and freelancers. And having been on both sides of that equation, I understand now just how important it is to read the fine print, to read the contract and understand what you are agreeing to. Can you talk a little bit from each of your perspectives, whether it's in the business place or at home, just about the importance of understanding your legal rights and understanding what you're agreeing to when you sign on that dotted line?
Sure. So to your point, I think the first thing I would say is not reading a contract is not a defense to its terms. So read a contract if you sign it, even if you don't have an attorney. Make sure you read all the terms of the contract. And I guess the main advice I would give, I actually work a lot with physicians and physician groups, so on both sides, both the kind of like employer and like, I guess, contractor side of things. And one thing that I would say is that, like, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself and know what terms are important to you. And also, don't be afraid to seek help from an attorney where, you know, you may have to spend a bit of money, but in the long run, it can save you a lot of grief. And I think, again, knowing the terms that are important to you and not to take things for granted. And I mean, like, you can contract to anything you want, essentially, as long as it's not illegal. And so if you want to put something in a contract that's important to you, you just have to ask. So yeah, I would think, like, just knowing what's important to you in your business, the brand that you want to build, putting those things into a contract can all be done. Just kind of have to ask and know what you want.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, ambiguity is your enemy, because if you leave something unclear, unsaid, or open for interpretation, it's most likely going to be used against you. And so, you know, for me, I've practiced business law and general law, so obviously the specificity of terms is important, but I can say, for example, with a parenting time plan, I advise clients, you know, it's really hard to, you know, if you get divorced and you have 2 6-year-olds and you say, how the hell am I going to contract for parenting time for the next 12 years? First of all, everything with kids is modifiable, but that is anxiety inducing. And I tell people, well, I understand if you don't want to be to the minute on Thanksgiving Eve and you don't want to get that granular, if you leave things too open-ended, while not only, yeah, sure, you might save a few bucks if you don't, you know, really get that ironed out, but you're setting yourself up not just for a financial issue down the road, but for potential litigation and dispute, because the other side is most likely going to use any ambiguity or anything that's unclear for them and against you. So I think it's on balance of, you know, as a lawyer who's, you know, a neurotic, anxious over every detail, which is good in a lot of respects, I think. It's important to get everything nailed down, but also you're not going to be able to account for everything in the future. But I would agree with both Rachel and kind of answer Justin. Any sort of contract, and just because you hire a lawyer does not mean you need to go spend some absurd retainer. Get some basic advice and counsel to ensure you're not signing an agreement or doing something that is either against your interests, you don't understand, or could complicate your life or business in the future, is what I would say.
Awesome. I'm also going to be switching it up a little bit during this conversation to throw like little spitball questions at each of you. So this one, they've not prepared for this at all. So this one you have to answer in 3 words or less. What's the most dangerous words in a contract? I'm going to give you like 10 seconds to think that through. 3 words or less. What's the most dangerous word or words that people should look out for when they're signing a contract?
I have a good one. Reasonable.
I would say to be determined. I don't know.
That's a good one. Hello? I would say, and I've seen this in judgments, to be determined, because what the hell does to be determined mean? Reasonable is excellent, because again, while there is in tort law, there is the quote-unquote reasonable person standard, but what the hell does reasonable mean? So reasonable is better than mine, but I would say anything to be determined is also horrendous.
Right on. Okay. So my next question is a little bit about focusing on when people are thinking about... Check. Can you hear me now? Okay, wonderful. So like I said, we have...
All right, well, can you all hear me still? We're all trying to speak up. Well, it might come back, it might not. But in any case, my next question is,
Came back.
some of the folks in here are folks that might be on the employer side, some more on the employee side. In the family situation, could be on either any side of a disagreement. But in general, I think a lot of people, I grew up in a family of lawyers, a lot of people are not always the hugest fan of lawyers because they get involved when there's a problem. sometimes, right? Let's be honest.
No one's coming to us with good news.
Exactly.
Maybe an estate lawyer if you get a big inheritance. Other than that, no one wants to be at the lawyer.
Right. So what would you say to somebody who maybe is reluctant to get lawyers involved in the first place? What would you say to them about working with a lawyer or even just consulting with a lawyer for their particular issue when they might be reluctant in the first place?
I will say, I'll try to throw my voice. Can people hear me? Okay. I will say a lot of lawyers get a bad rap for good reason, honestly. And so I will say though, getting a lawyer, say for example, in a contract negotiation at the early stages can save you a lot of money down the line. And so it's like, okay, I don't want to hire a lawyer, but you might be reluctantly going to a lawyer in the early stages. You're going to be even more reluctantly going to a lawyer when someone's suing you. And you're going to spend a lot more when that happens too. And I was also going to say earlier when we were talking about contracts, I think like, especially younger people or in a more like informal business setting, it's common to like get into business with like a friend or an acquaintance or someone kind of like personally in your network. And I think that like not having that to be determined ambiguity is so important in a contract, and it shouldn't be seen as like a slight to the person that you're entering into business with, but a respect for the fact that like we are both business people, let's enter into a contract, we are friends also, but like let's make both of our expectations super clear. And that's what a lawyer can help
I
you do.
completely echo that. What I would say, if you're looking for a lawyer for anything, family, contract, employment, tax, let's assume there's a base level of competency and experience, of course. I would advise, and I tell people I talk to, I think you should look for two things. I think you should look for personality and style fit, and I think you should look for communication. Because yes, we all need our lawyer to know the basics, to be competent and all of that, but different people have different styles. And you know, for me, I cultivate a very unique practice. I'm hyper communicative. I take my role as advisor and counselor very seriously. And you know, I think my personality, the clients that come to me, it really meshes with them. Some people in divorce might want the shark killer to make a mess. That's not me. But if someone wants someone who's going to give them excellent advice and is really going to shepherd them through a process to get to the other side, then I'm their man. So I think when you're working with any lawyer, you want to feel comfortable, you want to like their communication style, and while you don't have to be best friends with them, I think you want to look for a personality fit, because you know, unless you want to or need to go to war, if you're pretty passive and just want things to get done but don't want to get crazy, you might not want to hire the biggest shark in town who's going to turn your little mess into a complete kerfuffle. So I think knowing yourself and meeting a lawyer who knows what they're doing but also makes you comfortable is incredibly important.
Yeah. So many of us who are in creative industries, like myself and my team here, and many of the folks I see out there, a lot of what we're fighting for is our intellectual property, right? Is to really be able to own and benefit from the works that we create with our minds, with our hands, with our equipment, with our gear. And I would like to hear you talk a little bit about some of the ways in which we can use the law to our advantage to make sure that we are protected, that we're able to benefit from the fruits of our creativity and our labor. In particular, it seems like when you're just getting started in a creative industry, there can be exploitation, like people can take advantage of you. So what would you say to somebody who's really trying to protect their intellectual property, protect their rights as a creative professional, or even a small agency like myself, who are dealing with the big shots, the big brands, the big agencies? What would you say when it comes to knowing and protecting your legal rights?
Great question. No, go, please. I'm going to speak generally. So go ahead.
I think that, again, not to go back to a contract again, but especially I think it seems like a lot of like creatives, you maybe start out in like a bigger company or in a more corporate setting where you may be signing an employment agreement or some type of contract where your intellectual property is the company's intellectual property. And I think like there's always room for negotiation. People always say that when it comes to like salary, you know, PTO, you know, sick days. There's also negotiation when it comes to things like that, and it's like you can also, you know, on a more basic level, negotiate, hey, anything that I create for the company personally is mine, or anything that I create
I can
or-
use like for my own.
yeah, or like
personal
I
purposes, yeah.
can work outside of the company, because some companies will not permit you to do work, you know, outside of what you do for the company. And I mean, plenty of people, especially in that industry, do work in addition to their main like employment. So I think like, again, everything's negotiable. Negotiate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you know, I would say generally, I think this is both legal and just strategic. You know, if you're creative and you're passionate about your work product or whatever it is you're doing, I think you have to weigh on balance short-term versus long-term, and which is easier said than done, because, you know, if you're just coming out, you might need that extra couple grand in salary, or you might say, hey, I need this job, therefore I'm probably willing to give up more just to get it, which is really, you know, hard for us to say when you can or can't afford it. But what I would say is be mindful, because if you're extremely passionate about what you do, your art, your creativity, your IP, then maybe you need to be prepared to say, okay, maybe I take a short-term hit, but both financially and personally and emotionally and future-mindedly, the fact that I'm keeping all my own is going to make you much more, I think, confident and nimble going in the future. So, as Rachel said, negotiate everything, but I think it's a personal decision of if you think you're getting nickel to dime, or they're saying, hey, for 51 grand, we own everything, or for 46, keep everything of yours forever. I hate telling people not to take 5 grand, but think about how important it is for you to kind of have your own business manifest destiny.
Yeah. Definitely. I like how much quieter it is that y'all have to actually listen.
We
It's
can both
not-
project, I think, we're
But
not.
it's not actually working. So we'll pass this stick around and keep
Even
going.
Talking.
The talking stick.
I just want to say briefly, as a point of pride for my team and Flow Video, I'm a firm believer that if you're in a job, even if you're full-time, you should be able to freelance and do your own work outside of business hours. I myself do freelance and contract work outside of my regular hours, as long as it's not interfering in my ability to do my job and my team. I'm all for it, and so I try to encourage my team members to go out, be entrepreneurial, do freelance work, take on passion projects, do things that motivate you and help you feel a sense of accomplishment in your craft and your career that aren't necessarily related to your day-to-day job, but might be. It doesn't matter. And that to me is something that I think more companies need to embrace, that today's workers, millennials, Gen Z, whatever it may be, are not necessarily wedded to the same company and the same 9 to 5, with all of their intellectual property, with all of their heart and soul. They're looking to have opportunities to be creative outside of work, and that to me is a blessing, not a detriment. And it's something that I, as an employer, am proud to see my team do. And I would happily see them using the works that they create at our company to advance themselves professionally in their own careers. So if they want to take the awesome work that they've done that they're proud of at this company and showcase it on their own portfolio, whatever, by all means, absolutely. I encourage that because I want people to take pride in the work that they're doing. But that's not necessarily how all companies.
No, well, I think, first of all, I think you deserve a round of applause for that, because that is true. And I think, as someone who's been a lawyer for 11 years, just to see, not just the legal field, but the whole employment market, I mean, COVID changed everything. Employees are much more empowered now, which I think is fantastic. I even say in the legal field, what I put up with 11 years ago, and forgive me for using the word kids, young associates, they would not tolerate it. I also think what Justin said, and I think this is industry agnostic. I'm 35. Call it 20, 30, 50 years ago, the company man or woman was the norm. And I believe the company man or woman has died for the most part. Big three, maybe, your Fortune 500, maybe someone stays at a firm or company. But I think one, employers have become a lot more greedy and less humane. Like there's no more pensions. And I think therefore employees, professionals, you name it, have to be more individualized and independent thinking, because our bosses and employers are not looking out for us. So especially creatives, or, I always say one thing, I now work for myself. When I worked for a firm and a company, I always believed in the prospect of job security. There is real no job security when you work for someone else. Yes, maybe if you are the most niche expert or something, but even if you're good at your job, there are layoffs everywhere. And I think, for everyone here and kind of these next generations of employee, there's an empowerment that, frankly, I couldn't have imagined 10 years ago. And in Yiddish, there's a word of chutzpah, and I really admire it. Kind of means guts and kind of, really, I don't know, how would you say? But I think people today, they are a lot more, they speak up for themselves, they want what they want, they're not afraid to ask for it, which I think is great. And so I think going into even a few questions ago, look, it's still a negotiation, not everyone's gonna give you the pie in the sky, but you have to know your worth, and you have to know most things aren't life-changing opportunities. So if you think you're getting screwed, don't just take it. If it goes against, your core beliefs or what you think is best for you and your family.
I have one more
Please,
comment.
please, respond.
I was gonna say too, if you are a business owner or, on the employer side of things, there is still legitimacy in protecting your company. So I don't wanna
Absolutely,
say,
I know. I feel like we're
Yeah.
bashing, of course.
No, but I was gonna say, because I do represent employers and employees.
Boo.
I know, but I mean, like, there's legitimacy in, if you hire an employee who is, directly compete with you, that's kind of a
Of
problem.
course.
So you can always keep an eye out for those things, but on the whole, I think generally the law and society is a lot more forgiving to employees who want to work outside of that traditional confine.
Yeah.
But little shout out for the employers, small
Yeah.
businesses too.
I think she's saying the non-compete is basically unenforceable.
Not
So-
entirely.
That is like an expertise, Dicey.
Okay, so next spitball question. Okay, you got to answer this in 3 sentences or less.
Hard.
Okay, we see lawyers on TV, like trial lawyers, like standing up, doing their thing. In reality, law doesn't always look like that. We know that. But give me your best lawyer on TV moment that you've had as a lawyer that, like, cameras could have been filming, this could have been like a movie situation that actually happened in your work.
So I am actually a trial lawyer, partially. 2 summers ago, I tried a case. The plaintiff in the action essentially said that there was something on this video that was said about him that we couldn't decipher. And he wore a shirt into court that said decipher the audio. And the judge screamed at him and was basically like, you can't do that, all this stuff. So every time he came into court, I had to stand up and say, he's unbuttoning his shirt because he had a t-shirt on underneath. So every 5 seconds I said, he has his shirt off again, every single time. And I felt like a preschool teacher, but that was memorable.
It's fun. I would say I think I'm a very nice guy and professional. I can be a very mean writer. And I recently handled a case where I wrote an answer to an egregious family law matter. And I basically took 19 pages to go scorched earth on these people, which they deserve. And the very fancy, high-priced, expensive lawyer on the other side started the hearing basically saying I was a meanie and made her clients cry and upset, and to which I said, if I make awful people upset, I wear that as a badge of honor. And I won a victory for a woman who deserved it, and it was a feel-good moment. But over the 3 sentences, Suits is really unrealistic, great show. Here's why. Because it'll be like, Rachel, here's the case, trial's in and out. Like, that's not how it works. You're never going to trial, and if you do, it'll be in 2 years. But they're great shows.
All right, I want to open it up. Who has a question for our panelists? All right, Jeremy, my cousin.
Hello. How have you seen using like ChatGPT or other AIs like for helping reading different contracts and like that?
I have a good answer for that. So more on the litigation side of things, but ChatGPT is not going to replace lawyers, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a lawyer and have a vested interest in it not replacing me, but it gets a lot of stuff wrong, and I'll give you an example that comes out of New York where the attorneys that used it were sanctioned and received professional discipline because they used ChatGPT to draft a brief, which they then filed with the court, and it included cases that were not real. And the court said, "What is this? We can't find it." And they were like, "Yeah, well, it's real," and they doubled down. And so it is certainly a good tool. I mean, like, people I've seen use it in the legal field to like summarize things, or like, I mean, if you're just in your initial review of a contract or something, if you want to summarize like the points of it, it's certainly a good tool, but I think it's like something where it's like, you know, trust but verify. And yeah, so it certainly is a good tool, but beware.
Beware.
Yeah, the only thing I would say was the New York case, so I think lawyers need to be very mindful, and I think AI has its place, and it's an amazing next frontier, but if you have a lawyer who's like all about it, I would tread lightly, at least for maybe the next 10 years.
Yeah. Other questions? Thank you. Others? Yes, right here.
Hi. So I recently tried to do wires this year, contracting people out for my post-production company. What are some tips that you would give to me to make sure that I protect myself as well as the people that work with me?
As an employer, and hiring people to do editing work for you, post-production, yeah.
Go ahead.
So I would say, and this probably isn't typical, and I'll try and give a specific example and a larger one. I think anytime there's a contract, the biggest way people get out of them is if they're unconscionable, if people aren't aware. So even making people aware of the fact that they have the right to have it reviewed, you know, in my practice, especially if I have a case where the other side doesn't have a lawyer, I make them sign a waiver knowing they have a right to counsel. You know, in your case, obviously I don't know much about your business, but, you know, I think clearly delineating both employee expectations and specifically compensation if it's not straight line, you know, W-2 work. I think obviously there's probably different levels and categories and subsets of your comp package, but I think the clearer you are, the less likely you're going to have an employee who's like, well, you stiffed me on this or you didn't pay me for that. So I think being really clear and transparent on the comp structure will save you headaches from employees potentially saying you're shorting them or not paying them enough.
And I will say too, once you have those employees, we always tell people in my practice that is largely kind of like acting as general counsel. I deal with a lot of like personnel issues with companies, and I always tell people, document everything that you do. If you counsel someone because they're showing up late every day or they're unreliable, and you have documentation showing that, you know, if they have a surgery and they tell you about it and then you have to fire them because they're not showing up unrelated to the surgery, they might say, well, you're firing me because I took medical leave, that's retaliation, and I'm going to file a lawsuit in federal court. Well, if you have a documentation that's like, well, no, you just were unreliable and you haven't shown up to work reliably for over a month, then you can cite that rather than, you know, having no explanation other than, oh, after you said you were getting surgery, I fired you.
Yeah.
We're going to teach you all 3 letters. Who knows what CYA means?
CYA.
CYA, who knows what it means?
Cover your
Cover your ass. That's what we're lawyers, do what we do for a living. CYA. Cover your
Yeah.
CYA.
I just want to add, and this comes with the preface that I'm not a lawyer, so this is not legal advice. But as somebody in similar shoes to what you're coming into as an employer, I would just say that clarity is so important in communication. You know, there are lots of ways to communicate with people. Sometimes verbal is the right communication, in person, over the phone, over video. But summarizing those conversations in writing, even if they don't happen initially in writing, is so important. Because people forget what was talked about, or they misremember what was talked about. And at the end of the day, what people are looking for from an employer is clarity, right? They want to know that you're not all over the place, you're not changing your story, you're very clear about your expectations, you're clear about what you want from them and what you're giving them as far as compensation, resources, whatever it may be. And so I just try to be super clear in my communication. And if I realize after the fact that I wasn't clear, I follow up and I say, hey, just in case it wasn't clear, like, this is what I meant when I said this. And even if it feels like it's harsh when you do it, people actually appreciate the clarity. Obviously, try to be respectful, try to be compassionate. You want to be the kind of boss that people want to have, right? So that people stick around. But you got to be clear. You're not their friend, right? You're their employer. People have friends. They also have employers. An employer's job is not to be your friend. It's to be clear with you, right? Because it's a transaction. At the end of the day, I'm paying you to do work, right? It's a relationship of transaction. Other questions? Yeah.
Thoughts on like corporate non-competes and other some FCC stuff that's working its way through?
Yeah.
No, we have different views, so you go ahead.
Well,
Not
I mean,
different views, but.
yeah, I think like the enforceability of a non-compete is like, I'll give a classic lawyer answer, which is like, it depends. And it all depends on like the reasonability of it. So I'll give an example of something that I came across recently in my representation of a physician who was leaving a physician group, and the physician group said, okay, you cannot practice with patients that you earn here, at this physician group, or within a like 7-mile radius in this similar specialty for 1 year. And a court, if it came to that, will look at the duration, the scope of the actual work, and the geographic scope. And so in a place like, Metro Detroit, where there's a lot of physician groups, there's a lot of physicians, there's, plenty of places to work. Yeah, having to travel 10 miles instead of 7 to work at a physician group is gonna be reasonable, so you're not getting, say you work in Birmingham, you're not just scooping up all your Birmingham clients. Go work in Bloomfield for a year. But if you say you can't work in a 50-mile radius of Metro Detroit, that really limits you, and like that's unconscionable, maybe a court would say, and it's certainly unreasonable. So there's some courts have long held that there's some validity to protecting your business interests and not having someone leave and directly compete with you, but it is pretty limited.
Yeah, I think there's a trend too, kind of harkening back to the empowerment of employees. I think courts and society do not just favor the employers, but should be more. And what I see, I used to be a securities lawyer in my last life, so I did a lot of employment disputes in the securities industry. And what I would say is, and it's not to speak better or worse on, but I mean, the lower down the totem pole, you're like I saw something once on LinkedIn, and there's a lawyer who does a lot of non-compete stuff, and he cites, I see janitors, I see low-level admins who are getting, that's ridiculous. There's no trade secret there. I mean, really, what these agreements are for is so really high-end people are not stealing trade secrets, blatantly stealing clients. It's not meant to inhibit normal employees from earning a living and having a career. So, my advice is, if you're ever in that spot, you have to consult with an attorney. But I would say the less specialized you are, or super high up or niche expertise, I believe the harder it is to enforce, because the court's just going to be like, this is, employee A, like you're basically trying to rob them of a livelihood because they deigned to work at your employment place, which probably sucks because they're suing you for it. Not that all employers are bad.
One or two more questions. Yeah, Tim.
So there is something to be said about being able to advocate for yourself. So kind of in a similar vein to like hiring people, except on the other end of the spectrum. What are some common practices that you would recommend for creatives that either most commonly apply for like freelance or contract jobs, but even like part-time and full-time positions as well? Like, what are some ways that you can advocate for yourself so that you get the value proposition that you're trying to offer whoever you're working with, but also like to watch out for red flags that like say, hey, this is kind of sketchy. You probably shouldn't. You should probably look out for this X thing because that could cause issues down the road.
And we have a mic again for who knows how long.
I will say, full transparency, being like a young woman, I often find it hard to advocate for myself, especially in like a professional setting. However, I think that just like having something to back up what you're saying is like probably, like point number one. If you want X, why? And what proof do you have that you deserve it? It's like, of course you do deserve it, but like a company doesn't think that, so you need to show it. And I think like not feeling as though a company or whoever it is that you're negotiating with, a potential client, not feeling like they're just gonna get it because you say it, and having something to back it up is probably the most important.
Kind of like in math class when you're told to show your work. I think that's a great point. I have a perfect example now. I don't betray confidence or anything, but in a child support negotiation, the parties are differing, and my client, party A, is saying, I believe I should pay X. And I'm like, but there's no justification. And he's like, but I have all these things. And I told him, write me up 4 bullet points and I'll send them over. So I think, knowing your value and being able to speak up for it. I think the other thing in any negotiation or, business relationship is pick your battles. I mean, you might be going up for a job or negotiating a contract or a deal, and there's 4 things you don't like. 2 you can live with, 1 you don't love, and 1's a deal breaker. You kind of have to make that personal assessment of, okay, where's my leverage? What's the most important to me? Because, forget my practice. In life, you can't fight every battle. So I would say you kind of have to take personal stock to say, which things are most important or determinative for me, and how can I best present it to either get what I want or get closer to it than I'm currently being presented.
All right, one last question. Who's got it? Here's your last chance. Yes, Rodney.
Well, how important are licensing agreements, and what's the important thing as artists in licensing agreements? Because we have rights to our art, our creativity. So my question would be, licensing agreements, what are some of the important elements of licensing agreements?
Anybody?
That's a very specific question that I don't necessarily have like an industry specific answer to, but I think the tenets of contract law apply to any type of contract that you enter into. And I think understanding the terms, understanding and sometimes hiring someone to help you understand whether they are one-sided or not. And I think also, I'll give an example. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And I was talking to a friend from college, and she does freelance work, and she was really concerned in the type of work that she does. She's a wedding photographer, that if something happens the day of that makes it hard for her to perform her job, like a weather event, something like that, that makes it hard for her to perform her job, she's like, what do? I want to put something in the contract. And I'm like, that's the most standard contract term there is. It's called a force majeure clause. Just make sure it's in there. And so I think just having someone I would always recommend a lawyer, but like doing research, consulting an attorney, or knowing that you may not know what you don't know. And I'm sorry I don't have anything like more specific to licensing, but like that's just a general, I guess, like advice from signing any contract is trying to understand the terms, and sometimes that might involve getting an attorney.
Get an attorney, yeah.
I'm gonna have a similar example. I'm not an expert in that field, but general advice and the thought I just had would be really nail down within the four corners of that contract and agreement what is actually yours, because there's probably different types of art or types of work you have. Maybe it's at different events, and I think going back to not having ambiguity, you really want specificity on what is yours, because let's say it's vague, and let's say you go do work at an event for employer A, you might be like, hey, I filmed it, and they might say, cool, but you filmed it for us,
Right.
it's ours. So I would say being really careful and mindful of identifying what is actually yours, and probably in your particular position, again, I would always say consult with someone more in that expert field, but having rights over your work, irrespective of where or who it's done for, because I'm sure your view is, hey, I'm the artist, this is mine, while they might have a right to
So
use it
I
vice
created a
versa.
work.
Right.
We created a work that has other artists in the work.
Right.
And we want to license that work to the world so we can get paid.
Right, and I think you have to be, I think both sides have to be aware of what the compensation is for that licensing, but also where ownership and utility of use resides, because the last thing you'd want is, let's say you know, whether it's photography or videography, you name it, if you make this opus or your masterpiece, sure, you might want to license it and get paid for X, but that is your baby. That is yours that you want in perpetuity, and you want to make sure in contract you're not giving it up for that one time.
My question,
So
right.
I would say you absolutely need to make sure where the ongoing ownership and usage interest lies,
Right.
and that's where a subject matter expert would be
Thanks,
most
thank
helpful.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say there are lots of entertainment lawyers who do exactly that.
Yeah.
So I am not that,
Yeah,
but
I know so, yeah.
and then you sparked my brain when you said the four corners of a document. Any contract, all the court cares about is the four corners of the document. If it's not in the contract, they don't care. It doesn't matter what you talked about before you put it down. They're going to say, well, why didn't you put it in the contract?
Wow.
So it doesn't matter
Wow.
what you talk about. Put it in the four
Put it in the four
corners.
corners.
4 quarters.
And for those who are looking for an entertainment lawyer, he's a regular at this event. He's not here today, I don't think, but Howard Hertz is somebody who
Legendary one,
regularly
yes.
Oh, yeah?
comes here and
Okay.
he's ever talked to
Legend, yes.
Lastly, before we wrap up, I just want to ask each of you briefly, where can people learn more about you and your firm and what you do? So like 2 sentences.
Sure, add me on LinkedIn, Rachel Salina. I work at Barry Mormon, PC. In Birmingham, you can look us up. We have a website. You can read my bio.
Great.
Thank you.
Emmer Law PLC is my website. I'm Max S. Emmer on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, Emmer Law, and I'm on Instagram. I do videos. They are not as expertly done as Justin's. I film them. My wife, Karen, edits.
They're good, though.
But they're pretty entertaining, and I try to mix being informative with also entertaining and not dry. And find us and we'd be happy. If we can help you, great. If we can connect you with people who can help you, we're happy to do that too.
Beautiful. So the good news is we're not done. This panel is going to end, but please feel free to stick around. The bar is going to open up again. There's food, there's dessert. I want to give a quick shout out to Sheila Flanagan. Are you here, Sheila?
Yes, right there.
Give it up for Sheila. Sheila is our masterful event planner for Making Memories for You. Her event planning company, she is tremendously good at organizing events like these. And we do this every other month. So May 3rd, Friday, May 3rd, mark your calendar. We're going to be at Bamboo Ann Arbor. This co-working space is opening a new location in Ann Arbor. So come on out and join us. We're going to be on the rooftop. It's going to be a beautiful late spring morning or late spring afternoon in Detroit. So it could be snowing, but it also could be beautiful. Enjoy yourselves. Please stick around, have a drink, network, connect, And thank you all so much for coming out, and give a round of applause to Rachel and Matt.
Yeah. Flow Video. Flow Fridays, everybody. We are here with Flow Fridays.